Good evening. Tonight's story is the quirky little tale of The Delft Cat by Robert Howard Russell, first published in the eponymous story collection The Delft Cat and Other Stories in 1896. A quick note before we begin that Delft is a city in the Netherlands famous for its distinctive blue and white pottery. The cat in this story is made of ceramic and decorated in the traditional style. So now, let's open our imaginations and begin. Well, said the Delft Cat, I'm getting awfully tired of this. Here I have to sit on this blue and white cushion day in and day out and stare at the ceiling. Just think of it. I never sat on anything else in all my life. Now, why aren't people content to follow nature when they are making a cat, and not inseparably attach one for the rest of his days to a blue and white cushion? Why, even the common live cats, which are ever so much cheaper and more plentiful than Delft, are free from such ridiculous attachments. Of course, I don't mind it so much in the daytime when I rest contentedly enough on it, although even then I must confess that I have sometimes longed to sit on a hard hearthstone for a change. One gets so frightfully tired of continually sitting on a cushion, it's like having a sponge cake all the time when you want bread. But what hurts me most of all is the ridiculous figure that I cut when I get down from the mantelpiece every night at 12 o'clock to mingle with my friends and have to take that confounded cushion with me. You see, in the house where I live there are lots of cats, and although I am very particular as to my friends, I must say that 2 or 3 of them are worthy of the friendship and esteem of any cat in the world, no matter what his lineage. There is the little crystal cat from Japan, Miss Koto, and the bronze cat from France, Miss Barrier, and then Fleurette. Ah, mon cher Fleurette. Fleurette is a French porcelain cat, and I must admit that she has completely captivated me. It was those blue eyes of hers that did it. I never saw such eyes on a cat, and what's more, I don't believe anyone else ever did either, and of course, being so much out of the ordinary, they give her a very distinguished appearance. I don't want to boast about such a delicate matter, but if you wish to discover how fondly she returns my affection, just look at her any day as she sits on top of the bookcase with her head twisted around and her beautiful blue eyes gazing straight at me all day long without so much as a wink. Of course, it makes me very proud, and I find by actual measurement that I carry my nose 3/4 of an inch higher in the air than I did when I left Holland 6 years ago. Those Dutchmen are so stupid, though, that they never would believe it even if I should send them a photograph of myself. They would say it was a distorted print. I should like to go back there sometime, however, and see the man that made me, and give him a few points. In the first place, I should tell him that if he must make cushions to make them detachable, you have no idea of the mortification which I have suffered from the undignified appearance this undetachable cushion lends me when I walk about. Why, the first night I came here, when I joined my new friends a few minutes after 12, I was greeted with roars of laughter, and the Viennese cat orchestra struck up "Where Did You Get That Mat?" Of course, it was very painful for me to be submitted to their taunts, and the next day, in order to show my contempt for the low-bred felines who had insulted me, I turned my back to them all day long, but this did not have the desired effect, and all through the day I could detect their amused glances, and at night they laughed harder than ever at me. Fleurette, in whose kind heart had sprung up a feeling of pity for me, which has since ripened into one of undisguised admiration, whispered to me that night that they were laughing at the flowers on my back, and I have since discovered, by means of a mirror, that the stupid Dutchman who made me has painted a wreath of flowers in the center of my back. Now, did you ever hear of anything so entirely inappropriate and so utterly foolish? It's enough to make one revile his maker. Ever since that night I've had to hold my nose higher than ever in the daytime, and to look as dignified and impressive as possible, for if I don't, some of the ill-bred cats in the place are sure to take advantage of my unbending and chaff me about my floral decoration, and if there's anything in the world I hate, it's undue familiarity from cheap cats. One day I really lost my temper. A paltry little cat of imitation bronze, standing in a ludicrous attitude on a billiard ball, was the latest addition to our circle. In his paws he held a billiard cue, and as soon as he discovered the floral decorations on my back, he took a position on the mantel near me and, with an exasperating grin, stood pointing his cue at my back. I stood it as long as I could, but after 2 or 3 days it made me so nervous that I grew irritable and depressed. So I waited for an opportunity, when the parlour maid was dusting us, to fall backward on him and break his tail off. Of course, no one could attach any blame to me, for everyone supposed the parlour maid had been careless and knocked me over. However, it was a great triumph for me, as Vigneault was deposed from his place on the mantel, and, after having his tail treated with stratena, was locked up in a little dark cabinet on the other side of the room, where no further accident would be apt to happen to him. If he had been real bronze, his tail wouldn't have broken so easily, but blood will tell, and when you try to make bronze cats out of pewter, they have to suffer for it sooner or later. Well, I must be going, for I promised to meet Fleurette on the library table at 25 minutes of 1 to look at the rubber fish. You know manufactured cats never eat, but we have a much better way of enjoying food. We just devour it with our eyes. It's much the best way, as it doesn't destroy the food and entirely does away with indigestion, which, by the way, is what I heard your mother say you had when she put you to bed tonight. After Fleurette and I have satisfied our appetites by looking at the rubber fish, we are going to the paper theater to see the Japanese paper cats in a new play. This is the first night, and I am told it's to be very thrilling, with the beheading scene in it. After the theater, we shall refresh ourselves by seeing the little Delft milkmaid milk the Delft cow. If you should happen to be awake tomorrow night about this time, I will tell you how the play went, and, by the way, if it isn't putting you to too much trouble, if you could get a good fat bronze mouse for Fleurette and me to look at, we would be awfully obliged, for even when one only eats with one's imagination, a change of diet is desirable, and I haven't seen a decent mouse since I lived on a shelf in a Fifth Avenue store. Well, goodbye. I'm awfully glad to have seen you, and you won't forget that mouse, will you? There's a good chap. With these words the Delft cat vanished, and when the little chap awoke in the morning, he was not quite sure whether he had dreamed that he had been talking to the Delft cat, or whether he had really enjoyed the pleasure of his conversation. He looked in the parlour, and there was the cat on the mantel with his nose in the air. He examined the blue and white cushion on which he sat, and found that it was not detachable, and, on turning him around, found that a wreath of flowers was painted on his back, just as he had said. This, of course, served to convince the little chap that he had really been favoured by a talk with him, and ever since he has tried to keep his eyes open until after 12 in order to hear about that play, but he gets so drowsy before 10 o'clock that he falls asleep and doesn't wake up until the morning, when the Delft cat is back on his place on the mantel again, as silent as a sphinx. The best sentence in this story is, if he had been real bronze, his tail wouldn't have broken so easily. But blood will tell, and when you try to make bronze cats out of pewter, they have to suffer for it sooner or later. This is a cute story. I like the little date night where they go look at a fish and then they go to the origami theater and all the petty dramas that play out among the cat figurines. I also enjoy the recurring theme of, if I could go back to my maker and give him a few notes. I think we've probably all been there at times. If you've been following the channel for a while, you may notice that this story bears a striking resemblance to his other story, Eleanor's Christmas, which I read at Christmas time. It creates the impression that Russell spent a rather a lot of time hanging around, imagining the secret lives of various objects around him. It's not actually uncommon to project thoughts and feelings onto inanimate objects, and to be totally honest, I think the best people do it. It indicates an excess of empathy. Born in 1866, Robert Howard Russell was actually a book publisher rather than a writer, really. He specialized in unique, beautiful special editions of books, and particularly in illustrated works. The firm was started in 1888 and had an office and a storefront on West 29th Street in New York. He cultivated a wealthy, exclusive customer base, which allowed him to produce luxury editions of various books, and he became very well connected with all of the famous authors, illustrators, and book designers of his era. Today, physical copies of his books are rare, especially because he published a lot of one-off and limited editions, and they are worth quite a lot of money. He dabbled a bit in writing, producing this book of short stories and an autobiographical volume about his travels in the Far East. He also co-wrote with Washington Irving a book I would love to read, but it doesn't seem to be available online. A History of New York from the Beginning of the World to the End of the Dutch Dynasty, containing, among many surprising and curious matters, the unutterable ponderings of Walter the Doubter, the disastrous projects of William the Testy, and the chivalric achievements of Peter the Headstrong, the 3 Dutch governors of New Amsterdam, being the only authentic history of the times that ever hath been or ever will be published. It was illustrated by Maxfield Parrish, and it sounds amazing. I think he just published these things because he could. He never became very well recognized as an author on his own. Eventually, the publishing company was acquired by Harper's, and he died at the age of 60. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a little confession. This week's confession is that I have lived in the Netherlands for 8 years next month and never been to Delft, although I really do want to go. By and large, I've been pretty good at taking advantage of the small size of the country and the excellent train system to travel around and see various cities, at least for a few hours, but there are some notable exceptions. It's probably weird that I've been to Middelburg and Harlingen and Venlo and not to Rotterdam or Delft and only barely to Utrecht. I think Delft-style pottery is gorgeous, even when it's obviously mass-produced and not very refined. It's also very, very Dutch to copy something from somewhere else in the world and figure out how to produce it profitably at home to the point where it becomes part of the Dutch identity. They did it with tulips, they did it with chocolate, and of course they did it with this blue and white Chinese-inspired pottery. This country is really just amazing. Every day I feel lucky to live here. This is Restored Lore, where I find old, odd, and obscure stories from around the world, and likewise appropriate them to share with you. If you like discovering new literature and you want to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Please also consider liking this video to help boost it for other people. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you next week.